We've seen some companies that created a lot of value with non-paying customers, got acquired for very large sums of money. But ultimately, to me, if customers are paying, it means they really value what it is you're delivering.
LIlia Shirman, thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
Great, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Where are you calling from?
I am right in the middle of Silicon Valley, actually, in Redwood City, California.
In the middle of Silicon Valley, Redwood City, California. So today you are the CEO of the Shirman Group, an expert in go-to-market, and we'll talk all about that. We'll talk about the difference between go-to-market and marketing. And we have quite a long journey to get through today, but we have to start all the way back to your first job in college, I believe, when you were wearing a bunny suit. So it's quite a long journey from wearing a bunny suit as a job to being the CEO of a consultancy group in Silicon Valley. But take me all the way back there and paint me the picture.
Sure. The summer after my junior year in college, I got a job at Applied Materials, which is a semiconductor equipment company. And the part of the company I worked with was the what was called final test. So it was where these very large multi-million dollar machines, imagine a minivan size piece of equipment with robotics and gas lines and vacuum chambers and all kinds of things, going through final tests before they go out to a semiconductor fab. And they had to be in a clean room. So to get in there, you have to wear what's called a bunny suit, which is this, white coverall because you don't want any extra particles. And it becomes, you don't think about the jargon you use in your job. And so once in a while I would say, yeah, I spent all day in a bunny suit. And people would kind of look at me like, what's your job exactly?
Right.
And I actually ended up staying at Applied Materials for about another 4 years.
Wow.
After graduation. They kept me all through senior year and beyond. So yeah, that's my bunny suit story, and it's not nearly as exciting, I'm sorry, as one might think.
Well, it's still a great story. So then what happens? So you're starting out in Applied Materials. You spend quite a few years there, mainly wearing a bunny suit. And how do you end up becoming an expert in go-to-market strategy?
Yeah. So even then, because I was in this the culmination of all the things that the company did, my job was started out being about quality. So all the problems we would find before we were sending the machines out to the customer came from all kinds of different places, whether it was suppliers or assembly or a faulty part or whatever it may be. And so I got a view really early on into the interconnectedness of all things, into how all of the different things that happen along a supply chain contribute to the final product. And so while still at Applied Materials, I applied to Stanford graduate school, got in. Applied was kind enough to give me a fellowship to do that. So that was the first step in what I call the journey to the dark side. I did a really cool program that was in the engineering school, but had a lot of business school pieces to it. And a funny side story about that, my master's project, the class produced what is the Gorilla Pod, which is that little stand for cameras made out of little balls.
Okay.
So that was the winning team, and we were the runners up.
Wow.
And so coming out of Stanford, I got recruited by Accenture, which is one of the big consulting firms, their strategy practice.
Right.
And did supply chain strategy for several years.
So what does that mean, supply chain strategy? Like what I'm imagining in the day to day, you have to really like sit in front of a huge map and think about what are the different opportunities to go to get the products across. How does that actually look like?
So some of it is optimization, how many warehouses where, how
Right.
many, which factories, the distribution network. Some of it is more broad. We did quite a bit of acquisition work, the Compaq deck acquisition, Ascend and Cascade merged, which I always thought was funny because the two names were exactly opposites. So it was, bringing together operations of different companies.
Right.
I think a better, really descriptor for what we were doing was operational strategy. It wasn't just really supply chain and logistics. Although, some clients had Accenture doing that as well. So it was sort of a nice segue between my very geeky engineering background and sort of looking at it from a business perspective. And so I kind of
Right.
call my time at Accenture my, if the MBA wasn't the title of my master's, then those 3 years definitely were.
It definitely
And
sounds
then
like it.
from
Yeah.
there, I ended up doing something I knew absolutely nothing about. And I joke I like to every 5 or 6 years go and start something new that I know nothing about and learn it and then go do something else. So after Accenture, I went to BEA Systems, which is a software company, and I had no idea about anything to do with software. I went into a product marketing role. I had no idea about marketing. The reason I ended up there is because they were diversifying away from their core technology
Mm.
into areas that required an understanding of why integrating data and systems and so on would matter to our customer. And that I understood. Um, so they took a chance and they hired, what I thought was a kind of unqualified person, and it was a blast. It was a blast to do something really new.
It sounds completely fascinating, and I'd love to transition and discuss a little bit about the idea behind go-to-market strategies. 100%, we're seeing so many different emerging markets today, so many emerging technologies that I get to observe both as a student at Stanford from the engineering side, but also as a member of J Ventures from the investment side. And one of the key questions is always, how do you bring the product out to the audience, and not in terms of marketing it, but how do you actually, what is the chain like to get there? And it's obviously it's a common question for a small startup and for a big enterprise. Can you start, Lilia, by explaining to me what is go to market fundamentally, and why is it such a crucial aspect, and then allude to how your firm helps companies optimize that?
Mhm. Yeah. So I define go to market very broadly. Um, to me, it's pretty much everything a company does to get its product out in front of paying customers, right?
Why paying?
And
Why is that an important piece of it?
because if you don't have paying customers, eventually you run out of cash and can't do
Mhm.
whatever magic it is you want to do, right? Fundamentally. And yes, we've seen some companies that created a lot of value with non-paying customers, got acquired for very large sums of money. But ultimately, to me, if customers are paying, it means they really value what it is you're delivering,
Okay.
right?
And I'm also
Um,
assuming that that the reason that word is in there is because the strategy is inherently different. A way to acquire a free customer is very different than acquiring a paying customer, right? It's maybe a different demographic, different strategy, different friction to get there.
yeah, absolutely,
Mm.
absolutely. And of course, it's different between business customers and consumers as well.
Right, right.
Um, yeah, and my focus has definitely been on the business side, but I think a lot of the ways that we think about delivering value and uh, unifying everything you do that's customer facing is very relevant to both consumers and businesses,
Mhm.
right? And so when I think about go to market for younger companies, there's always, when you're pitching to investors, there's always this slide you're told you have to have a go to market slide. And a lot of founders really struggle with that because they're thinking, we don't know yet, right? We're early, or they don't have that expertise on the team. And so that size probably has the largest variation I've seen in terms of something that makes sense and something that's just clearly pulled out of the air, in the last, as an afterthought to the rest of the presentation. There are three parts when I think about go-to-market. There's sort of the strategy, and the fundamental decision is, who are we serving and what problem are we solving for them?
Mm-hmm.
That's really, really simple, right? And that's something that you should at least have a good idea of, or a good thesis about, when you start out, right? And then the questions that follow are things like, by what means are we solving that problem, and what mode are we going to build around it that's defensible long term, right? Mm-hmm. Those four questions at a startup level is what you need to answer. As you grow, then you get into planning and content and value propositions and marketing strategy and alliances and all the other things that make up go-to-market. But at the beginning, those four questions: who, what are we doing for them, how are we doing it, and how are we going to keep this wow and unique, are the four things you really need to think about.
Right. So it makes perfect sense that this strategy changes, on a very regular basis as the product is changing, as the team and the world is obviously changing. Your strategy should be changing. Is this something that you recommend thinking from the get-go as you're building the product, already understanding this is the strategy of how I'm going to get it to the customer, or is this at a later stage? When does it really become a crucial part of the company, this go-to-market?
So I think of it in stages, right? When you're first starting to conceive the product, those two questions of what problem and for whom are going to be really important, because they influence how you design the product. They influence how the user interacts with it. They influence how much you have to plan to invest in sales and post-sale support, how you're going to reach that customer. There's a lot of decisions that cascade down from those few, right? And so I would say start thinking about that really early, because it's going to influence how much cash you need, and who your competitors are, and so on. So I would say from the get-go. And then you're going to refine, you're going to iterate, your packaging, pricing is going to change. A lot of things are going to change, but you've got to have that thesis early.
So the next question that I have is, I'm thinking of myself creating a startup in a few months with some really great friends from Stanford, from the Army, wherever. We're going to be sitting around. We're going to build hopefully a great product, and none of us have any experience in supply chains and go-to-market strategies, and even thinking about what it takes to bring a product there. And obviously, when we're 2 weeks old or 2 months old, we're probably not going to bring an outside executive to come and do our go-to-market strategy from the get-go. So how do you balance your lack of experience with the need to have some strategy playing out?
It's a really easy thing. You go talk to customers, right? They will tell you. Don't ever try to do any piece of go-to-market, even the really early guesses, in between the four walls. The best thing that a team can do is just go really understand the customers you think you'll have. Talk to them about what problem. Ask a lot of questions. They will tell you.
Right.
You don't need an outside expert. You don't need to hire an expensive CMO, whatever it may be. Just go validate, and then go validate again.
Right. So one of the things that we said earlier is that there is a clear distinction between go-to-market and marketing, and that's something that I guess is often confused between the two. That your marketing strategy is not necessarily the go-to-market strategy, and vice versa, right?
I would say go-to-market is just a broader set of decisions.
Okay.
Marketing, I joke that the M word should be actually banned, because it means so many different things. Right. But ultimately, marketing typically is about generating demand for your product. But there are a lot of other things that impact the customer experience. I'll give you an example.
Please.
Look at Apple Computer. Apple Computer, when Steve Jobs started, he understood instinctively that it's not just about the functionality of the computer. It's about the experience. It's about the interface. It's about the packaging. When, later on, when they opened stores, it was about every single thing within that
Yeah.
store, right? So it's, the marketing are the amazing ads, the word of mouth,
Right.
and so on. But go to market is everything. It's the decision of how you're going to distribute. It's the decision of having an Apple expert within a Best Buy store, for example.
Right.
There's a lot of things around it that it's kind of how to build an ecosystem of partners and developers. That's all part of go to market.
Who holds the responsibility of the go-to-market strategy within an organization, even as it scales to tens of thousands of people? Who holds that responsibility?
So I think it's usually the chief marketing officer,
Okay.
but it really is an executive team discussion because you have strategic alliances and product and so on that also have to be very engaged. A customer experience now is usually a separate function.
Wonderful. So, LIlia, there's so many more topics than we can discuss, but I also want to make sure to hear a little bit about the book that you wrote and some more insights that you've gained from that before I ask you my favorite question of the interview.
Yeah. So the book I wrote is 42 Rules for Growing Enterprise Revenue.
A lot of
And
rules.
it's really 42. And, if you're a fan of Douglas Adams, you know why 42.
So why 42?
Because it's the answer to life, the universe, and everything.
Yep, the meaning of life.
Um, so it's a distillation, really, of the thinking processes and frameworks that I had used both in my, operational roles and with clients.
Okay.
And it was a great opportunity to kind of think through, how do I think about solutions? How do I think about selecting markets? How do I think about relationships with customers and customer relevance and value? So it's a very, each rule is like 2 pages. It's a really quick read. There's a lot of different frameworks in there, and it was a lot of fun to write.
I'm sure. Was there a specific trigger to writing it? Did you see some pattern forming? Or is this mainly insights that you've gained over the years that you just had to put on paper and send it to the world?
Well, the trigger was the publisher approached me and said, write a book.
Okay, that's
My
an
first
amazing trigger.
response was, yeah, it's a great trigger. And they already had kind of a format, that you had to follow. I don't know that I would have written it quite that way if I just started from scratch. But it actually, when you have to provide an idea in whatever it is, 600 word, two small pages, you get very, very focused on the core thing.
100%. I have to, also mention the reflect back. I recently launched a book about youth entrepreneurship and some personal experiences. There was no, word limit. There was no structure, and it was a very interesting experience. Very different, I guess. That for me was just a blank page. Just write the story and then condense it to sound good. Uh, now that you're mentioning this word limit, I almost wish I had imposed a word limit on myself so that I could even condense it more and feel that I'm focusing more on these ideas. But it's really great, and the book is available, I'm guessing, on Amazon to purchase.
Yeah, yeah, it's any online bookstore.
Wonderful. Okay, so
Amazon.
the 42 rules. I'm excited to take a look at it myself. LIlia, I want to thank you for being so generous with your time. Thank you for sharing your insights, both about your journey from the Bunny Suit all the way to the Shirman Group, and your expertise on selecting markets and go-to-market strategy, and in general how companies work and operate. This is exactly why I'm doing this show, to learn from experts like yourself that have seen so much, that a lot of the mistakes that you've perhaps observed, or the successes you've observed as a young entrepreneur, I can now take those lessons with me and hopefully make less of them on my journey. So thank you for that. And before we leave, I have to ask you for 3 words that you would use to describe yourself.
Ooh, so this was you gave me warning, and it was still hard.
Yep.
it's not a single word, but I would say short attention span.
Short attention span. I like
I
that.
um, I'd say I'm pretty creative, and even though I'm creative, very structured.
I
I
like
like
that.
to create boxes and inner relationships and make very complex things conceivable.
So short attention span, creative and structured. I think those are, and that's a fantastic combination. Lilia, thank you very, very much. Thank you for the inspiration and stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you.